Hello, it's been a minute, and I'm back because I really want to talk about a topic that has been on my mind for so long, and I just never made a video about it, and it's the infantilization of Gen Z. I feel like Gen Z, by and large, especially women in Gen Z, are heavily infantilized, and I just want to get into it, have a really casual, almost like FaceTime with a friend kind of conversation. And I will be probably dropping a video or maybe a post explaining more about why I've been gone, all of that. So stay tuned if I decide to do that, if y'all even care. Anyway, let's just jump into the topic. So I kind of feel like Gen Z in a lot of ways refuses to grow up or is perceived that way. And I don't mean this in like a disparaging kind of way or even in like a critical kind of way, because I am Gen Z, I'm elder Gen Z, I'm 26. So I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean it in kind of like, you just notice that there's just so much. There's a lot of like, oh, I'm a 25-year-old teenager, I'm a da-da-da-da-da. And of course, I honestly relate a lot. I kind of say these things a lot in passing. And I wanted to dissect it more, Honestly, for a really long time, even at 26, like I struggled for a long time to see myself as an adult. I've been in the corporate world since 2022, since I was 24. Like I was a fresh 24. And back then I literally felt like a little guppy and like everyone on my team was older than me. I was the youngest on my team. Actually, currently on my current team, I'm a UX designer, by the way. I'm the youngest on my entire program. So I still definitely feel the effects of being young. And, nowadays I don't care as much because I talk with my colleagues like very normally. No one thinks of my age. But again, I think there's a lot of reasons for this that I wanted to talk about. And I really just wanted to be like a casual conversation, laid back, nothing crazy, not like crazy statistics or facts or research, just kind of some light research and just conversation on why I think this is a thing. And I think nostalgia, like the job market, like stability in general, and a lot of other reasons contribute to why I think Gen Z overall feels really young, despite the fact that we're like elder Gen Z. The eldest Gen Zer is like 28, 29 right now. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about that I noticed with this whole thing is helicopter parenting. So I think this plays a huge role, like how we were raised and how we were parented compared to previous generations. So ever since I was a kid, I was super into 90s media. Even back in like the 2010s, I used to watch like 90s shows, 90s movies a lot. And even like when I listened to like different things from back in the day, kids back then were a lot more loose. For example, I feel like skipping class and like leaving and going in and out of school was a lot easier than when I was in school. So I graduated high school in 2016 and I still remember how freaking draconian or territorial like these teachers were. They're like, you are not leaving this class to go to Chick-fil-A or anywhere else. And we still did it anyway. I mean, I didn't really skip class because I didn't have a car, but I skipped my last day, and so it's like, I feel like in general, we were under more supervision. Like around that time, I think that's where like surveillance cameras became more prevalent. I feel like there was stranger danger constantly when I was young. Like I remember getting a letter when I was like 6 or 7 years old in first grade. My parents were talking about like a creepy man in the area that was doing this or that. Like we got a letter from like the school district about a man that was like targeting children. There was America's Most Wanted, and there was like all these other things about like stranger danger. And the online space, like MySpace, I was not allowed to have a MySpace. My parents were so like, no MySpace, you're grounded if we find out you have one. It was a very different era in general. And I'm just speaking like holistically. I know that there's very different cases. I know there were a lot of parents back in the 2000s with my age group that just didn't care. Like I'm just speaking more like from a blanketed statement, but I know there's always outliers. There was actually a study done by the PubMed Central on helicopter parenting, and they noted in their results that 83% of parents showed behaviors of helicopter parenting, especially those who have a single child as compared to those having more than one child. So I thought that was very interesting. Okay, so like my dad, for example, my dad came to this country at 26. So my parents are from Ghana, and my dad immigrated first, and he immigrated at 26 to go to school and get his master's and all of that. And he would tell me stories about how he used to hitchhike in the 80s. Like in 1986, 1987, he used to just hitchhike and just take rides anytime. And he was like, it was much safer back then to do that. Obviously, I wouldn't, like, don't ever do that today. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just a lot more of a lax environment. But it's like, I couldn't imagine doing something like that in the 2000s or nowadays or anything like that. I think in general, helicopter parenting leads to less independence and self-sufficiency, fear of making mistakes. So honestly, I can say for myself, and no shade to my parents. I have great parents. My dad, though, He's quite the helicopter parent. He was quite the helicopter parent. And I can honestly say in some arenas, I think it definitely made me question my judgment more. I had to really learn how to trust my own judgment. My mom was a lot more like chill and not as like panicky, but my dad on the other hand was very panicky. Nowadays, of course, like I've found a healthier rhythm with my dad and all of these things, which is great. But I just noticed how that contributed to me being a bit more doubtful of myself. And I think for a lot of people, maybe y'all can relate if you've had parents that were very helicopter, very like, kind of anxious. It kind of made you one of two ways. Either you became more anxious and less willing to try things, or you rebelled. It's like one or the other, So I think that's a big thing. I think when you have a family unit or adults that don't make you feel empowered, that can spill over into your adulthood and making you feel like you're not as mature as you should be at a certain age. So the next thing I want to talk about are unprecedented adulthood experiences. And so I think we're living in very unprecedented times right now. I think anyone can agree, no matter where you come from, what you think, like we're living in very unprecedented times. And we're living in times where financially things are more unstable than they've ever been, and things are rising, like costs are rising at rates that are insane, and then there's also just tons of like political pressures and all kinds of things going on that other generations can't really relate to. I've been also thinking about the topic of just job security. That's been another thing that I was debating on, like whether I should talk about this first or job security. And I think, the government layoffs has been insane. I mean, for example, growing up and pretty much for so long, if you had a government job, you were a shoo-in, you were secure for generations. Like you were good, if you had a government job. People would snag government job and they would die in it, But now working for the government, it's like, it is not all peachy keen. Like people are getting laid off constantly. And I mean, me personally, I've seen colleagues being laid off. I mean, it's been actually a very scary and unstable time to work in government. I actually work in GovTech, civic tech. So I've been seeing it firsthand, and it's incredibly jarring because I've never been so close to things that are changing in the government. Like I've never been that adjacent to actual change in the United States the way I am now. And it's very, very jarring. So I think that's another thing. And then, you count student debt, inflation, people can't get a house anymore. Like it's not the same as, back in the day when you graduate college, you work for a year, you get a house. Nowadays, people aren't really getting homes until like their mid-30s. I think the average age for a homeowner today is 36 years old. So it's not usual to have a house in your 20s. By the way, if you're feeling behind because you don't own a home in your 20s, you are totally fine. It's not the norm, especially in today's economy, to have a house in your 20s. Obviously, it's a stretch goal. Obviously, it's a thing that people desire, that most people desire, but it's not as feasible as it once was. It's like we have prices going up, and then our wages, the amount of money we're making a year, is not going up. It's like, it's completely just, it's insane. So I found a report from Bank of America from July 2024 that says that nearly half of adult Gen Zers are getting financial help from their mom and dad. So 46% of Gen Zers, so age 18 to 27, rely on financial assistance from parents and family, according to new research from Bank of America's Better Money Habits financial education team. In addition, 52% of those surveyed said they don't make enough money to live the life they want and cite the cost of living as a top barrier to financial success. Many said they are delaying milestones and are not on track to buy a home, 50%, save for retirement, 46%, or start investing, 40%, within the next 5 years, even though they're working towards those goals. So I thought that was very, very telling and very, it just speaks to what most people are feeling, that we don't feel financially independent. I think there's also just the conversation of like even relationships and dating. Like it seems like it's a trend now that Gen Z would rather stay single instead of plunge themselves into a disgusting dating market, and like it's awful. That, and then of course the job market's so hard to find a job right now, and so many people are just getting laid off in government. So like I've been discussing things with like professionals, people like friends, and they're like, if you have a job right now, hold on to it because it's insane. Someone I'd worked with was talking to me about how they've been looking for a new job and they only got 2 interviews. And this person is so experienced in their field. They're such a strong worker. And like, honestly, his experience like inspires me because I'm like, dang, man, you really killing it. But he's been in the field for a while. So it's just really crazy that you're competing with so many different people right now. And it's impossible right now. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very difficult. So I think because we're not hitting these traditional milestones, like getting your career, like your dream career out of college or a few years after college, not getting a house, not being able to afford ends meet, needing financial assistance from parents, I think this is why a lot of people in Gen Z do not feel like they are, an adult, because we're not meeting these traditional milestones. And so I think what's happening now is we're beginning to redefine what these milestones are and, things that we want to meet before we hit those traditional milestones. So I got an excerpt from this article which says that for many, the timeline of adulthood is now more flexible, dependent on personal experiences rather than a set age. While previous generations, such as baby boomers, often felt obligated to adhere to traditional norms, such as marrying young, buying homes, and having kids in their 20s, Gen Z prioritizes emotional stability, career fulfillment, and self-discovery before assuming the adult label. I think this is very true, very characteristic on social media. A lot of self-help, self-improvement content. And just in general, I think we are in an age where we're redefining what adulthood is. I think it's very fascinating. I think just for me, it's just fascinating to even discuss because things have changed so much in the past 10 to 15 years. And I think a lot of it started with the Great Recession of 2008. A lot of us remembered the recession. Yeah, it's very fascinating in my opinion. So another thing I wanted to talk about, I think, is nostalgia. I think nostalgia and going back to the past has been huge amongst our generation and millennials as well. I think when life gets hard, people want to turn to something that makes them feel safe, that reminds them of a previous time that wasn't stressful or worrisome. Nostalgia is a really powerful thing because you'll think back to 20 years ago or something like that, and everything just seems so simple and so great. And, entertainment was better, and we actually owned things. We had physical media. Nowadays, everything is digital. You don't own anything anymore. Things were very different. So I think that's a big thing. I also feel like social media in general, there's this baby-like aesthetic, especially amongst women, that's encouraged, baby voices.
You are so beautiful. I love your smile. And you smell good. Thank you.
Again, girlhood. I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with girlhood. I think honestly girlhood is really cute, but it's I think it can sometimes get to a point where it might be too much of a reliance on, okay, I'm just a child. And then there's also conversations, I'm just kind of going off track here, but another thing I've been seeing is kind of the concept of age gaps. I feel like Gen Z has really taken the definition of age gaps in a crazy thing. I saw a comment about how 22 isn't an adult, but 27 is. And I'm just since when was 22 not an adult? I mean, obviously at 22, you're not a fully fledged, realized adult in the sense of a 60 something year old would be. But there's people who are in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 40s, whatever age, that are really immature. And then you have people in their early 20s that are mature, which also brings me to the conversation about the idea that your brain doesn't finish developing till you're 25. That is actually a myth. That is a myth. That is a myth. So apparently this misunderstanding comes from the fact that there was a research study done examining brain activity and brain maturity, and they only studied people up into the age of 25. They were looking at subjects up to the age of 25. So based on what I found that science actually says, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making, impulse control and long-term planning, that continues developing into your mid-20s, and that usually stabilizes around 25 to 30. So that is accurate in the sense that your prefrontal cortex, usually stabilizes within your late 20s to early 30s. However, the brain remains plastic throughout life. So it means that it continues to adapt, form new connections, and change in responses to experiences, learning, and even trauma. So your brain is constantly changing and your brain is constantly adapting. Also, I think brain maturation, which this makes a lot of sense. Brain maturation depends on the person, really. You think about how some kids, there's usually a set of milestones that certain kids should be achieving at, a certain age or grade level that they're at. But every kid kind of learns it differently. A perfect example of this is me and my best friend. So my best friend, growing up, she learned how to ride a bike at 4. She learned how to ride without her training wheels at 4 years old. I didn't learn until I was 8. So I took double the time, but I eventually learned, and I don't know if that's late or early for a kid. Is that bad? I don't know. I think that's fine. I don't think that's bad, right? But yeah, so I took double the time that it took her. Also with tying her shoes, she learned at 5, I learned at 6. And there's other things, even with our handwriting. I would say that with handwriting, I realized that I learned how to write like on the lines and a bit more, I guess, stable than she could. So there's just certain things, like everyone matures differently, and I think even in adulthood, you adapt differently. Everyone talks about, oh, like if you're under 25, then you're still a child because you're blah 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 blah. But no, really, your brain continues to mature well beyond your mid-20s. So I think honestly we need to kind of gauge things by a person's individual maturity. Because again, I've met some pretty mature like early 20s, and then I've met really crazy dumb early 20s people. And I think about how I was in my early 20s, and I would say I was pretty mature, but I look back and I cringe a lot. You know, I'm going to be 27 in the fall, and I think back to 5 years ago and it makes me literally want to convulse. So, you know, it's different for everyone. I also wanted to mention real quick about like, you know, different reboots, remakes. You know how Disney's like remaking like every single movie known to man? Like Lilo and Stitch is going to come out in May. That actually looks really good, by the way. I don't know if y'all saw that trailer of Lilo and Stitch, but that actually looks good. But literally for the past like almost decade, they've been doing that. And I get why Disney's been doing that. I think it's simply to stretch the longevity of their IPs, right? A lot of things are remade simply so that way it can be consumed by a newer generation and it can last longer. I think that's like the basic explanation I heard before as to why they're constantly stretching out their content like that. But yeah, that's happening. Like we see a lot of child stars and, you know, different celebrities cashing in on nostalgia, referencing their olden days on their shows and like doing their podcasts and stuff like that. Then there's also the fact that there are many young adults out there who never got to experience childhood. I don't want to forget a sector of people who never got to experience genuine childhood because maybe you were dealing with a lot of trauma, you were dealing with a lot of horrible circumstances, very dangerous circumstances possibly, and so you were never in a position where you could enjoy being a kid because that was stolen from you. So in adulthood, you're making up for it, which is totally fine. You know, maybe if you didn't have enough money to get certain things, now you have the money, you know? So like in that sense, I think it makes a lot of sense. I still think even with that, it's important to have balance though and to find healthy coping mechanisms rather than just running to the past. You know, I think that can be very dangerous in a lot of ways, but it's understandable, you know. So the last thing I wanted to talk about in reference to this conversation is accountability. A lot of people say that, you know, people in their 20s might try to frame themselves as children to avoid taking accountability for their actions. And, you know, I think there is some truth to that. I don't think it's entirely true, but I think there's some truth to it. I'll literally speak for myself and be very vulnerable and say that a lot of people, when they see me, they think I'm really young. They think I'm like 18, 19 years old. They think I'm a college student, you know, but I'm 26, gonna be 27 soon. And so sometimes, especially when I was a little younger, I would take advantage of that a little bit. I'd be like, oh, everyone thinks I'm just this like young kid, so if I make a mistake, it's fine. You know, and I am guilty, right? Maybe other people do the same thing, but I do think sometimes people can use infantilization to avoid taking full accountability for their actions. All right, so here is where I conclude. And bro, that sounded like a freaking like college student paper. Oh, to conclude. I used to say that all the time. But anyway, basically, to kind of wrap it up, I kind of feel like the question should be, what is the balance? So like, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling younger than your age or feeling like you don't feel fully adult. I think with the way society has been changing and just with the way dynamics have been shifting, it's totally okay to feel that way. I myself feel that way all the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. However, for myself, I don't want to get into like my 30s or 40s and still feel like a baby. However, that's probably going to happen at that age. I think it's very likely that when I do reach that age, I'm probably still going to be saying the same thing, so hey. But I just think the pitfalls of thinking this way is that it could probably undermine your ability to be taken seriously. So, you know, you think about in the workplace, I didn't even talk about like workplace infantilization, but that's a real thing. And I do think that, you know, when you think you're just a kid, sometimes you might end up shortchanging yourself, whether consciously or unconsciously. And I think that's really important to kind of watch out for and keep in mind. It might lead to people dismissing your struggles, dismissing your opinions, not seeing you as an authority in your field or an expert in your field. And I think that's something that, again, should be watched out for. I also think it could possibly lead to not wanting to take real risks, right? Like, you know, maybe there's different risks you could take in relationships and career and just personal growth, and you don't take them because you don't feel like you're ready for it or you still feel like you're too young for it. You know, of course, I think this is like a case-by-case basis because there's certain opportunities you'll get. I don't think you're just going to turn it down because you're like, I feel like a child. I don't know if it's like that black and white, but you know, there's little implications there. So I just think in general, I think this whole thing is important to keep in mind. It's important to kind of dissect. And, you know, I think it's important to just naturally adopt adulthood as it comes. You know, the more experience you get, the more you progress in life, the more adult you'll feel. But I think that there's anything I've learned at my age, I've realized, especially since I work with people that are older than me, or even I work with millennials, I work with Gen X. If there's anything I've realized, it's that everyone is trying to figure it out. No one ever has it fully figured out. No one is ever a fully fleshed out adult. You know, everyone is still trying to find their way, find their footing. It's just that you begin to pick things up along the way, so you're smarter and wiser than you were yesterday, but you still don't know everything. So I think it's taking it one step at a time and giving grace to yourself and grace to your peers. But just trusting that we'll all be okay and we'll figure it out in time. But in the meantime, we kind of just have to deal with being lost. But, you know, trusting that it'll work out. I just wanted to kind of do this video. I'm wondering how the rest of you feel around this sort of topic. What are your thoughts? What are your curiosities? What are your concerns? Do you feel like infantilization is taking on a new height? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's not a big deal? You know, let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to hear y'all's thoughts. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.